Humans need fantasy to be human, to be the place where the fallen angel meets the rising ape. Terry Pratchett, Hogfather. For well over a century, there's been a strong push against fantasy, especially from the literary community. Which is funny to me because fantasy stories are as old as humanity, while literary fiction is barely 2 centuries old. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Today, we're here to talk about how important fantasy is in general, and to specifically discuss a couple of the greatest fantasy anime to ever air. Welcome once again to Musings by Danon. If you're new here, my name is Danon. I've been watching anime since 1985, and I'm currently reading over 500 manga or light novel series. This means I'm currently reading the source material for 14 of the anime airing this season, including the inspiration for today's video, Frieren, Beyond Journey's End. But before we get started, I'd like to quickly ask you to like and subscribe. It really does help the channel, and it's free. With that out of the way, let's get into the video. Frieren Beyond Journey's End explores the most valuable resource any of us have: time. You can always make more money, you can always grow more food, you can always rebuild a house or even a town after a disaster. But you can never get more time. At the end of episode 1, Frieren, someone who is functionally immortal, comes to that devastating realization. I've stated numerous times that this is the best fantasy manga that I've read since Maoyu, and I stand by that statement. If you've only ever seen the anime for Maoyu, I highly encourage you to pick up the manga and read the rest of the story. It's only 16 volumes, it shouldn't take you that long. You can get all of them over on Bookwalker for fairly cheap. Link down below if you want to pick it up. Now, before we get into the premise of Maoyu and make comparisons between it and Frieren, we need to discuss the genre of medieval fantasy, at least from the perspective of Japanese entertainment. I'm talking, of course, about Japanese role-playing games, or JRPGs. The 2 biggest and most influential are Dragon Warrior and Final Fantasy. Now, we're not going to do a super deep dive, but I did want to talk about the tropes and the basics of the story. In most turn-based JRPGs, you have the hero, the warrior, the wizard, and the healer. Sometimes there's an archer thrown in, or maybe a spoony bard. Sometimes there are several, sometimes dozens of classes that you can pick from, but that's getting into the weeds a little bit. Regardless, you have a group of about 4 colorful heroes coming together to defeat a rising threat to humanity, usually a demon lord of some kind, a dark or demonic creature who rules over an army of monsters. And it is only through the effort of this small team of chosen heroes that humanity can be saved. Now, most modern stories involving a hero can be traced back to the monomyth, also known as the hero's journey. Made famous by Joseph Campbell's book, The Hero of a Thousand Faces, Campbell was a student of Carl Jung and was heavily influenced by his work on analytical psychology and the discussion of archetypes. But almost all of Campbell's research is based in Western mythologies, not Eastern. So even though you can practically draw a straight line from Lord of the Rings to Dungeons & Dragons, the original Western RPG, I'd have to say that the classic JRPGs are probably about half based on D&D, while the other half finds its influence in Journey to the West, which means that JRPGs are an amalgam of Eastern and Western heroic tales. Now, in some early Final Fantasy games, the story is pretty straightforward. Final Fantasy IV is about redemption, while Final Fantasy VI and VII are mostly about revenge. But almost all Dragon Quest games pretty much follow the same plot. Gather a party of heroes, grind levels and find gear, then defeat the big bad. When we see anime based on JRPGs, this is the meta they draw inspiration from. With that established, let's discuss Maoyu. The hero, not wanting to risk the lives of his companions, takes off in the middle of the night to fight the Demon King alone. But oh no, she's hot. And she's smart. She explains to the hero what would happen if she, the Demon King, were to suddenly die. Yes, the war would be over, and soldiers would stop killing each other. But aid from the northern human nations would stop flowing to the southern reaches, the front line of the war against the demons. Tens of thousands of soldiers would be out of work. This would lead to banditry, starvation, famine. More humans would die in just a year after the war ended than if the war lasted another 10 years. In other words, the Demon King uses geopolitical and socioeconomic reasons for why the hero should join hands with her, all in an effort to see what lies beyond the hill. Which brings us to our next section. What lies beyond the hill? When you're trapped in a never-ending cycle of war, heroes fighting demon kings, humans killing demons, the world cannot advance. And it has been this way for millennia. I'm going to be getting into some mild spoilers here, so if you haven't read the manga and you don't want to be spoiled, skip to the timestamp below. Okay, ready? The world itself is trapped in a cycle because of the gods. When the hero refuses to fight against the Demon King and instead joins hands with her, the world creates a new hero. And a hero needs a Demon King to fight against, so a new one is created. Now the world has multiple heroes and multiple Demon Kings. And until they kill each other, the world will keep creating more. The entire premise of the manga is breaking cycles and evolving. And the fact that the manga is a deconstruction of the classic JRPG elements dovetails perfectly with the theme. Deconstruction is a way to both view and create art. It's also a literary tool. When used as such, you break down a story into its core components, examine the tropes common in the genre, then rebuild it using the same building blocks, but create something new. It won't be a huge twist, all of the elements are there and familiar to people who know JRPGs, but Maoyu is a deconstruction of the typical JRPG tropes. Rather than the Demon King and the hero fighting each other, they work together for the sake of the world's future. In the anime, they practically swap places, with the Demon King helping humans to evolve and become educated and independent, while the hero dons the mantle of a Black Knight and ensures that loyalty of the multitude of demon tribes continues to the Demon King. But Frieren isn't a deconstructionist retelling of the classic JRPG. So what is it? For those who are living under a rock, Frieren starts out with the hero's party returning to the capital after successfully completing their 10-year-long mission to defeat the Demon King. They are hailed as heroes, and a huge celebration is held. Humanity will survive. That night, a beautiful meteor shower appears in the sky, one that only comes every 50 years. Frieren, the elven mage, casually mentions that next time, she'll take them all to a good spot so they can see it better. Despite journeying with 2 humans for a decade, Frieren still doesn't appreciate the limited time humans have on this world. In the blink of an eye, 50 years pass. At least it is the blink of an eye for Frieren. She returns to the capital to find the hero Himmel old and bald. When she left, he was young and handsome, and he knew it. But now he's at the end of his life. Heiter, the priest who traveled with him, is also old. Even Eisen, the dwarf warrior, appears to have aged a little. The 4 of them take one more journey to see the meteor shower, and Frieren was right. This spot was much better. A few days later, Himmel passes away. A massive state funeral is held. And for some reason, Frieren is crying. She has no idea why. After all, she'd only spent a short 10 years with this man. And what is a decade to an elf? The rest of the series is about Frieren trying to find the answer to that question. All of us are given a limited amount of time on this planet. It is up to us to determine what we do with that time. As we get further and further into Frieren, we discover just how much of a focus on time there is in this anime. Spoilers for episode 10. Cute stuff, if you wouldn't mind putting up a timestamp for me? Thanks, love. We already know that Flamme, the legendary mage from antiquity, was Frieren's master. She teaches Frieren all about demons and how to kill them. We already knew that demons love magic and will dedicate decades or even centuries studying it. We find out in episode 10 that the hierarchy among demons is based on their power, specifically the amount of mana they have. This is easily determined. Anyone who can use magic can see how much mana another mage has. But Flamme taught Frieren to hide her mana, to limit the mana she releases to 1/10 of its normal value. For an elf like Frieren, this is easy, but it is a bit tiring. How long do I need to keep this up? Flamme tells her that she needs to do it for the rest of her life. Later on, Flamme tells Frieren that she needs to stay hidden and not make her name in history. Not until she defeats the Demon Lord. 1,000 years later, she finally meets someone who sees through her mana-dampening deception and realizes how powerful she is. The hero, Himmel. So she joins Himmel's party and eventually defeats the Demon King. It's no wonder Frieren doesn't initially feel any attachment to her party members. She'd only spent 10 years with them, but she'd spent 1,000 years by herself in the woods, training every day until she was the strongest mage on the planet. What's 10 years to someone who has lived for over 1,000? It isn't until after Himmel has passed that Frieren starts to realize what it is she's lost. So at the end of the day, Frieren isn't just about time, it's about choice. We choose how to spend our days. Frieren has spent a long time alone in the woods, doing nothing but training. So for her, 50 more years to see the next meteor shower is nothing. She's very experienced at letting decades pass in an instant. But in that same 50 years, Hyder became one of the leaders of the church. Ison helped to rebuild his village and trained numerous warriors. Even Himmel went around helping people and checking to make sure demons were still sealed away. But Frieren? How did she spend her time? She just wandered around the countryside. The way I see it, Frieren is learning to live. All she's known up to this point is study. She's never really experienced life. Every day, Himmel wanted to have fun. Help people, save them, defeat evil, and have people remember him. Yeah, he's got a bit of an ego, but he wasn't trying to conquer the world or anything. He didn't become the next king or marry the princess. He just wanted to help. Sure, he had a bit of an ego about his looks, but you can't have a flawless hero. Those are boring. Eventually, Frieren learns to be like Himmel. At least a little bit. While studying genres, you notice that patterns emerge. Invention, discovery, perfection, parody, and reinvention. First, a new genre is invented. Sometimes this new genre is a heavily modified version of an older genre, or maybe it's the blending of two genres. Take romantic comedies, for example. Romance is a genre unto itself, as is comedy. But a romantic comedy is its own thing. Now, once the genre has been invented, other people take it and run with it. This is where tropes come from. Now let's take a look at fantasy. Fantasy existed long before JRPGs came out. Tolkien did not invent fantasy, but he did modernize it. And for 30 years you had people writing stories that were similar to Lord of the Rings, or only got published because Lord of the Rings was so popular. Hundreds of fantasy authors came into existence. And it wasn't until Robert Jordan finally wrote The Wheel of Time that the age of the epic fantasy finally came to an end. So what's next? It's time to reinvent the genre. Maoyu, as a deconstructionist story, is a parody of the JRPG genre, only without the comedy. It takes all of the tropes that make a classic JRPG and re-examines them, allowing a new story to form from the same pieces. Meanwhile, Frieren is the reinvention. For years, we've seen manga and anime that are based on the JRPG genre. Banished from the hero's party, I decided to live a quiet life in the countryside is one example. Rising of the Shield Hero is the story of 4 heroes, each forming their own party and trying to save the world. Hell, even Raka, Braves of the Six Flowers, has a bunch of heroes, all chosen by the gods to defeat the Demon Lord. But there are a whole bunch of examples where they take the basic premise and flip it on its head. Anime where the villains are the main characters and angels are the villains, like in Overlord, or How Not to Summon a Demon Lord, or The Devil is a Part-Timer. There's also anime like Arifureta, From Commonplace to World's Strongest, where the main character is betrayed by the heroes and is forced to turn to a life of darkness and vengeance. But that's not what Frieren is about. Frieren is a return to the classics. We don't have heroes who are actually villains. We don't have misunderstood demons that are actually good people. Demons are proper monsters, dangers to humanity. Dragons are treasure-hoarding, human-devouring monsters, not maids. And magic may be something you're born with, but in order to become a mage, it requires years of study and practice. Terry Pratchett said it best. Humans need fantasy to be human, to be the place where the fallen angel meets the rising ape. Fantasy tells us there is more to life than getting up, working for 8 or 9 hours a day, then coming home and listening to our spouses complain about the neighbors or kids or their job, then going to bed and doing it all over again. Every day for 40 years. Fantasy tells us that adventure is out there. Fantasy reminds us that dragons exist, but it also reminds us that dragons can be slain. And that is the single most important thing fantasy gives us: hope. Otherwise, what's the point of it all? Frieren reminds us to both stand up for what is right, but to also stop and smell the roses. You can do both and still be a hero. You don't need to always be slaying dragons. You can sleep in when you need to. But when the time comes, slay that dragon and do not hesitate. But it's more than that. Fantasy teaches resiliency, helps to generate and enhance critical thinking skills and emotional intelligence. But most importantly, fantasy provides us a sense of wonder. We finally get to ask ourselves, what lies beyond the hill? Thanks for tuning in. Once again, a huge shout out to my editor cutestuff. I couldn't make these videos without her. If you'd like to hire her to edit your own videos, she can be reached at cutestuff.edits@gmail.com. Link is down below. If you're looking for ways to support the channel directly, you can head on over to patreon.com/Danon. There are several tiers to choose from. You can pick an anime or manga for me to do a video about, or you can join our monthly manga club. I also wanted to give a quick shout out to all of my patrons: Waffles, Jiraiya, Danny, Muffins, Marcus, Squishy, Brett, Roxy, Josh, Sean, Pob Zombie, Mark, Alex, Borgie, Jake, Exiled Rogue, Manassas, Nazwin, Pedro, Airnor, Tom, Echo Fox, and Midge. You guys are awesome. I post anime or manga videos often, or you can click here to watch additional videos. Again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all again next time on Musings by Danon.